To anyone watching this video, hello and welcome all. What you're currently watching is the beginning of a little project of mine, one which originated from a fierce and fiery debate with a fellow scholar and peer in the field of gaming. During the debate, our opinions clashed constantly over the quality of modern games, when games were first starting to get good, and, more importantly, when gaming died. After the debate, I had to conclude that I was a fraud, but so was my opponent. I was not ready for the debate, not at all, so I dug deep. I opened Wikipedia, I opened Moby Games, I looked through various threads and forums online, and after looking through all of that messy data, after laying out everything in front of me, the idea for this video series came to me like a flash of divine inspiration. To say it shortly, in this series I will be playing video games all the way from the 1970s to the modern day. At first I wanted to make a series where I play every video game ever! And I quickly whisked that idea right into the bin, because it sounds horrible and it would probably have been horrible, and I don't have the patience for that. It's way too of a monumental challenge. Instead, I'll be picking a varying amount of games per year and trying them out, seeing how the gaming landscape changed over the years, and finally clawing out the answers to that fierce debate I once had from this massive experiment. When did games finally start getting good? And when did gaming die? I still don't have the exact format figured out for this series, and the style of videos will almost assuredly change over the episodes. But for now, I expect the core to remain the same. I kinda just wanna yap about games I played, and sometimes games that I did not play, but with good reason most of the time. I'll also be presenting some statistics later on, I think, and I'll be throwing every game I played into a tier list as well. So I'll just add this disclaimer here. My rankings and opinions should not be taken as the word of God, not really. I'm gonna be playing mostly very old games, and even if the methods I use to play them try to be faithful to the original experience, they are almost assuredly completely different, because I am not using original hardware. I refuse to believe that some of these games sound so fucking horrible on the original consoles. I just refuse to believe it. On top of that, there will also be dozens of games where I only played them for a very short amount of time. So most of the rankings I give, they are more like my first impressions of a game, or like the experience of trying it out, and not really a full in-depth analytical ranking of the game. Though some games might venture more into that territory if I spend more time with them. Regarding story-based games and games where you are expected to complete the game, I'll try to finish those, but most of the time, if I really don't like it, I'm still gonna rank it, even if I don't finish it completely. I'll only really do that if I feel like it's worth my time, and spoiler, there are really not that many games which feel like that to me. Now that I've gotten all that disclaimer slop out of the way, let's get into the real meat and potatoes of this video. The early 1970s was truly the birth of the gaming market, because before this, games were, well, they were different. Gaming was mostly relegated to electromechanical arcades and things built on college mainframe computers. They weren't necessarily bad because of that, but it is a technological difference compared to ROM-based cartridges and machines that run on microprocessors, like nowadays. But in the early 1970s, something more familiar to the gamers of my time popped up, and that was the first home video game console ever released, the Magnavox Odyssey. Pong, a mega hit of its time, was actually itself based on a copy of a game on the Magnavox, and this little funny thing sparked one of the first big legal battles of the gaming industry. And things like those big legal battles, stuff like unclear limits on patents and regulations, and where the law extended regarding video games. It was so different back then that you even got stuff like unlicensed movie tie-in games, which is, it seems pretty whack to me now. But it was not just the Magnavox, because later on other consoles like the Fairchild, Channel F, and the Atari VCS, which would later be known as the 2600, started popping up, and with them the popularity of home video game consoles and gaming itself at home became more common. But if you look at purchasing power nowadays compared to then, the games cost an absurdly huge amount of money, which is kind of crazy for shit like this. And regarding computers, stuff like mainframe computer games were being shared in universities, and games programmed in BASIC were being shared where possible. That could be played on all different kinds of computers. I think it's a very interesting period of gaming history, but that interesting nature does bring with it some problems for this series. Namely that a lot of the games are built either on hardware that I most definitely don't have on hand, nor can I easily get to, or they are built on technology that can't really be emulated. It's only possible to recreate them again. Yeah, there actually was a surprising amount of games that were straight up just lost media, or playing the original versions of the games it could be done, but it was such a pain in the ass that I just don't want to go through that. That was sort of common too. And sometimes the games could be played on arcade machines in some museums or something, but I don't live in the United States or wherever the fuck those consoles mostly are, so that's not an option for me either. The reason why I'm mentioning this and why this is a problem, well, this presents some difficulties in trying to get the original experience, the intended experience. Okay, so let's take an example of something in this video, but in a more vague sense. Like if I played an arcade Atari game, and I say I played this game and I talk about it being an arcade game, I almost certainly played the Atari 2600 version of the game. Or maybe something like how I say I played Colossal Cave Adventure, but I actually played the Don Woods version, which came out in the later 70s and not before 1977. Because the very original one by Crowther, well, I did not play that. I will try to mention these crucial details when talking about these games. So, especially in this episode, take what I say about anything with a huge grain of salt, because the stuff I looked up wasn't really that clear, and yeah, I will almost certainly not be accurate to the original experience intended by the console and the developers. Now, hopping into the games that I did not play, but the ones I want to talk about. Starting off, I want to mention this. It's not really an elephant in the room, but it's a pretty significant part of this era's gaming that I did not even touch once. And that's the 101 basic computer games. It was a compilation of type-in computer games in the basic programming language, collected by David H. Al. The DEC, or the Digital Equipment Corporation, originally published this as 101 basic computer games under that name in 1973, and it finished printing in 1975. By the early 1980s, it was the first computer book to sell 1 million copies. So this whole work is pretty easily accessible on the internet nowadays, and I really considered giving it a try, but on a whim I just decided not to do it. It didn't really interest me that much, and it seemed like it would take 1 million years to go through it. But I've been considering making a video on it later, if I get a whim of wanting to try some very basic early on games out. I just want the people watching this video to know that this exists, and I might touch more upon it later, but not in this video. Now I want to go over games that I think are actually playable for those who want to go through the effort of doing so. These are games that can be played on the DICE emulator that emulates some 1970s arcade games. I wanted to use it myself and try this out, but unfortunately I just couldn't get anything to work, and I really lost interest in trying to make it work. So yeah, still these games are not lost media, and if you are interested in trying this out, you can try getting the emulator to work. So first up is Highway. Highway, also known as Highway, was a 1976 racing video game developed and published by Atari for the arcades. It was Atari's first video game to use a sit-down arcade cabinet. In the game, one has to dodge cars on both sides of a narrow two-lane road, and each car passed gives the player a point. If the player hits a car, they lose all momentum and get no points. The game ends when the time runs out. It worked on a pre-microprocessor design and used vertical scrolling, which was influenced by another game called Taito Speed Race from 1974. And later on, another arcade game named Night Driver from 1976 would use the same cabinet design again. It is very similar to other games I played from this time, and while I did not play this, I kind of feel like I played it because it's so similar. So next up is Anti-Aircraft. It's a fixed shooter two-player Atari game made for the arcades in 1975. In it, planes fly overhead, and players try to shoot them down, and two players compete to see who scores more points, since the more you shoot, the more points you get. I did not play it, but I did play something very similar later on, which is basically a port of the game for the Atari 2600. It was called Air-Sea Battle, and I will cover that game when I get to it. Steeplechase is an Atari sports video game made for the arcades in 1975, where 6 players play against each other, and the computer plays the 7th player. In it, each player controls a horse and they must jump over fences, with the fastest one winning the game. The game was actually called AstroTurf at first, and all machines that still exist have that printed on them. It's one of the first side-scrolling video games. Shark Jaws. It's an action video game made by Atari with the actual name being Horror Games, released originally in 1975 for the arcades. It's an unlicensed tie-in to the movie Jaws and believed to be the first commercially released movie tie-in video game. In the game, the player controls a deep-sea diver catching small fish while avoiding a great white shark trying to eat him. It is one of the first swimming video games, and also displays a kind of fishing, and it's also among the first video games set underwater. It is a very unique game in its presentation, and differs a lot from the space and sports video games that are very common during this time period. Now there are also a bunch of other games for that you can play on the DICE emulator. And if you are interested, try looking into it. But this is the extent of the games that really I wanted to mention, or really interested me. Now next I'll be going over games that, to my knowledge, cannot be played on that emulator, and are more inaccessible. The effort needed to play them was just too high for me to play them. Death Race. Death Race was an arcade racing game that was developed and released by Exidy in the United States in 1976. It's a modified version of the company's previous 1975 video game Destruction Derby. In Death Race, you score points by running over humanoid gremlins, and it could be played with 2 players. In the game, when the gremlins are run over, they screech and squeal. It's a sound I really don't want to imagine, considering the horrid sound design of this era's gaming. Like, Jesus fucking Christ, the sounds suck. The gremlins, when run over, are replaced with tombstones, which makes gameplay more difficult, as they clutter the screen and running into the tombstones has to be avoided. This game attracted a great deal of controversy in the 1970s USA, due to the game depicting the killing of humanoid figures. In 1976, various media outlets began to attack the game for facilitating violence in virtual form. A real great first example of video games causing violence, or rather, people yelling that they do. It was a high-grossing game of 1976 and 1977, and one I did not try out, but I felt it was interesting and meaningful enough to mention. Moria. Moria was a game released either in 1975 or 1976, though it was given a copyright date of 1978. It was a dungeon crawl style RPG developed for the Plato computer system that ran on a mainframe computer accessible by terminals. In the game, up to 10 players could simultaneously go through a dynamically generated dungeon presented to players in first-person wireframe 3D. It was popular with the release of Dungeons and Dragons happening around the same time, and was a popular method of role-playing similar stories in video game form. It was really only one among many D&D inspired university projects, like the Plato game D&D and others that came later on, like Ortenac. I will be talking a lot about those a bit later on. But here's some fun facts about this game. One is that one of the creators, Duncombe, was inspired by the works of Tolkien and D&D, though he had never either read or played either one. And the other fun fact is that Batin, the other developer, suggested to make it 3D instead of top-down two-dimensional, inspired by other games like Panthers, Spasm and Airfight, which were also mainframe games in universities. It is one of the first somewhat significant dungeon crawlers of the 1970s, and one of the only ones that I think can still somewhat realistically be played today on a Plato emulator that can somehow be accessed on the internet. I did not go through the effort of learning how to do that. I saw the website, I think, but maybe there was an easier way to play this game that I missed out on. But I think it's a somewhat complicated process to get access to that Plato emulator. Wheels 2. This is one of the many sequels and spin-offs to the original Wheels, or Racer, however you want to call it, which was created in Japan by Taito, under the name Speed Race. This one was produced by Midway Manufacturing Company in 1975. I mean, this sequel, Wheels 2. It was a 1 or 2 player game that had no microprocessor, so it worked on older tech, unlike many of its contemporaries, which were already moving on to microprocessors by the time this game came out. In it, players race cars against computers, gaining points for elapsed distance. Seawolf. Seawolf was an arcade Midway game, like the last one, and this one was designed by Dave Nutting and released by Midway in 1976. It was an update to the game Sea Devil, which itself was based on a Sega 1966 submarine simulator video game named Periscope. The game was released in Japan by Taito, as the two companies had a partnership agreement where they distributed each other's games in their respective countries. In-game, you operate a submarine, launch torpedoes vertically to sink ships, and you move horizontally across the screen before time runs out. It sold 10,000 units and was one of the highest grossing games in the US in the years 1976 and 1977. Later, it was ported to Commodore computers and even had a sequel. It also got a retro video redemption game based on it that was released in 2008. And surprisingly enough, the highest record was actually achieved and verified in 2011, 30 years after the game released. EVR Race. EVR Race was a 1975 developed and manufactured Nintendo arcade game that is now considered lost media. It used EVR tape, which is film with frames scanned and converted into video display. The game was based around betting on either car racing or horse racing. The players would bet which racer would win, but since the footage was pre-recorded, there was very little interactivity in the game. Nintendo does not even have a cabinet of the game anymore, and very few tape reels exist. However, in 2016 and 2021, there were a few sightings of this game being sold, but it has not been confirmed anywhere if any of them even work anymore. F1. It was a 1976 electromechanical arcade racing game developed and published by Namco and distributed by Atari, since they had a similar partnership to what Taito and Midway had, where they each distributed games made by the other in their respective countries. In-game, the player uses a steering wheel to control the racer and avoid collision with other vehicles. Indy 500, a 1968 electromechanical game, is believed to be the inspiration for this, and one you can try out with the DICE emulator. This game was widely successful upon release. Thrill, responsive controls, and the attractive cabinet design were all liked by people. And it was one of the first games based on Formula 1 racing and one of Namco's first hits. From 1976 to 1977, it was the biggest game in Japan and the highest grossing electromechanical in the US in 1977. F1 provided the basis for Namco's hit racing video game Pole Position. The game was so successful it topped highest grossing charts for 2 years in a row and was only dethroned by Space Invaders. Even in 1978, when Space Invaders came out, it was still the 8th highest grossing game of that year and the highest grossing electromechanical one of that year. Oh yeah, this is a bit late, but this may, it's better late than never. I guess I could point out, if someone is interested, what an electromechanical game is. Well, in short, it just means that the game was made with mechanical parts, and its animations and sound were made with lights and motors, while microprocessor games used display graphics and software to do the same thing. Heavyweight Champ. Heavyweight Champ is a series of boxing video games made by Sega, of which the original arcade game that I'm talking about now came out in 1976, Japan. Many have attributed it as the first video game to feature hand-to-hand fighting, and it was a commercial success in Japan. Yet, in spite of its popularity at the time, it's actually now considered lost media. It had monochrome graphics and side-view perspective, and 2 boxing glove controllers which moved up and down for high and low punches with inward movement for striking. In 1987, a later adaptation of the game was made, which was also a commercial success. When the Sega Master System game James Buster Douglas Knockout Punching, what a fucking name, was released outside North America, they used the Heavyweight Champ name. It was totally unrelated to the game, and the game got, well, very negative reviews. Apparently, it is also claimed that the 1976 version of Heavyweight Champ was the first video game to ever depict a black person. Now, next up we're gonna move to one of the biggest games of this era that I wanted to play, and one I feel is most significant, and I think I have a lot to say about it, though I did not play it. And, well, I should say them, because it's not really one game. Dungeon. I'll say this now, there are actually, like I said, multiple games with this title released during this time, and I'll be touching on a couple of them. Dungeon was one of the earliest role-playing games, running on PDP-10 mainframe computers, similar to the Moria and Plato system situation I talked about before. Don Daglow wrote the game in either 1975 or 1976. He was one of many that tried to implement the new hit board game Dungeons & Dragons into a video game. He later proclaimed the game had melee combat, lines of sight, auto mapping, and NPCs with discrete AI, although the game was only played through text input. It was also one of the first games to employ line of sight displays. The game also had top-down dungeon maps that showed what the party had seen so far. This was possible because of the switch to CRT, which allowed the screen to refresh in a few seconds instead of a minute or more. DECUS, a user group who used computers which made the original game available, distributed another game with the same name. But that game was really just another version of Zork, a text adventure game that would later become a model for early MUDs, or multiple user dungeons. I'll be talking about the real Zork in a later episode, I just thought I'd mention this here. There was also another game named Dungeon, which was released on the Plato system by John Dalesk, Gary Fritz, Cenk Good, Bill Gamel, and Mark Nakada. But I will not be going too deep into that one. Because the one I am most interested to talk about today, and the most well known of this game, is a very similar game to all that I've mentioned before. And it's called PRE-1977, or The Dungeon. In the game, the player controls a character exploring a fixed, single-level dungeon that contains a randomly generated number of monster encounters and treasure. One can fight monsters with either weapons or spells, or they can flee the fight, and characters that the player creates can be saved between sessions. The developer Rutherford developed the game in 4 to 6 weeks, something like that, in late 1975, as a computerized take on Dungeons and Dragons, like the few other games I've mentioned so far. Its name was PRE-1977 because it was made for the 5th lesson slot for the school's population and energy group on the original network it was made on. This game is also one of the first dungeon crawler video games and one of the first computer RPGs. The Plato network later on received an improved version of the game, which they named Ortanak, a game that I have mentioned before. Since the game was not deemed an appropriate use of resources by the school, PRE-1977 was deleted from its slot, but Rutherford continually restored it over time. This game was in some ways a predecessor to the roguelike genre, since this game inspired Rogue itself, which the genre is named after. The game is playable on an emulator of the Plato system, and way back when people actually used the system, it was also playable on that, thanks to the fact that the developers shared the source code of the game. Now, I did not go through the effort of obtaining this game, so I did not play it. But let me just say, I have already played a whole lot of very similar games that came out in later years, and I have a pretty strong suspicion that these dungeon games, influenced those ones pretty heavily. And if they did not, they were just really similar, probably because of the shared D&D inspiration. Either way, these games in general, I think, are a very significant part of gaming history, or at least I feel like it, as the dungeon crawler genre would become a defining trait of the RPG genre, and dominate that genre for an extremely long time. Like, it would seriously take quite a lot of time for non-dungeon crawling RPGs to start coming out. Phew, okay. Now that I've got all of this out of the way, we can finally move into the final phase of the video, and really, in some ways, the meat of the video. This is where I once again caution to take my opinion with a grain of salt and not really as the word of God. I played different versions that I checked were close enough to the original game, and on hardware that it was not meant to be played with. You know, I don't think these fucking arcade games from the 70s were meant to be played with my modern PCs, you know? As such, there are a bunch of problems that bother me about it now that probably weren't even problems during that time. And I'm almost certain that some things like the sound were not this broken when they came out. And that's only a consequence of modern technology interacting with that code or something, I don't know. That being said, I will be rating them mostly by my experience playing them rather than trying to somehow analytically rank them and try to, you know, objectively really rate the game and how well it does this and that. I will be just going mostly by what my feelings were, how I experienced the experience. As such, it will not really be an objective experience, I guess. With that being said, again, now that I've babbled all this babble, yap, let's get into the real meat and potatoes and the last section of this video. The games from this era that I actually played in some vague order. Number 10, Night Driver. Night Driver was a 1976 Atari racing game made for the arcades. It's one of the earliest first-person racing games and one of the first games published that featured real-time first-person graphics. It had a black and white display and scaled rectangles representing pylons that lined the edges of the roads. The player drives a car on a road at night time, trying to not crash into the side of the road that is marked by those pylons, which have reflectors on them. And the difficulty just affects how sharp the turns are. The car that you sometimes see is not drawn in game, it's actually printed plastic that is just slapped on the screen. Now, for my humble opinion about this game, at least the version I played, it was certainly an experience. Or to put it another way, this game sucks balls. It's actually fucking horrible. I fucking hated it. Mostly due to how broken the controls were and how annoyingly impossible it was to turn in time. And you know, I admit I fucking suck at games. I'm not good. I have like the instinct of a 5-year-old brain dead patient, okay? But still, for these games and for game controls and shit, but holy fuck, this was clunky and shit and unresponsive, like compared to almost anything. And you know what? This is a 1976 game that I'm playing on a modern PC, so I'm not surprised. I don't hold it too much against the game, but I just have to say that my experience was fucking miserable. You know, I try to be more fair to these games that are, you know, old and they have limitations because of their time, but I really just couldn't enjoy this experience at all. It was completely silent without sound, which was actually probably good because knowing some of these fucking games, it would have sounded horrible. But yeah, this game was also kind of monotonous in the 1970s kind of way. You know, just one thing happening over and over again. That's not my biggest problem with the game. That's fine sometimes. I just couldn't experience this. I just couldn't experience any joy in this game at all. So this is pretty definitely an F-rank experience for me. Number 9, Galaxy game. A game that was made all the way back in 1971. It was a space combat arcade game made by Bill Pitts and Hugh Tuck for the PDP-11. It's an expanded version of the 1962 game Space War with an exclamation mark, and potentially the first game to spread to multiple computer installations. In the game, there are 2 spaceships, Needle and Wedge, that are engaged in a dogfight while maneuvering in the gravity well of a star. Both of the ships are human-controlled, and both ships are being pulled towards the star in the middle of the screen, while the players have to use thrusters to move around, have limited fuel, while trying to shoot each other. The gameplay has quirks like using the star's gravity to get gravity assist, but you also risk falling into the sun if you do that. And if one leaves on the right side of the screen, you come from the left side. I watched and read stuff about this game and played a slightly different version of it, so my ranking again isn't really fair at all. But I still had an experience with this game or something that was very similar. So I thought, why not add it to the list? You know, it's not like I have an abundance of games that I played from this time. In fact, there's almost none. So yeah. All I can say about the version I played, well, it was sort of slow and clunky and very simple, but you know, it's charming in its own way, especially when you consider this was the start of the 70s. And you know, it was pretty big compared to something like, well, games where it was just a pixel moving on screen, like in the 50s or 60s, or just some math games. But you know, it was still slow and clunky and kind of boring, even if it had its own charm. I'm not impressed in it as a video game now, but for its time, I think it does deserve some non-negative attention and maybe a little bit of respect too. Number 8, Tank. Tank was a 1974 arcade game developed by Key Games, a subsidiary of Atari. This was one of the few original titles not based on an existing Atari property that was made by Key Games, which was basically a fake competitor that was made by Atari and part of Atari. In the game, two tanks drive through a maze and try to destroy each other. The players avoid mines that are represented by X marks in a central battlefield. The players control the tanks using their own joysticks, and firing shells happens with a button. When successful, players earn 1 point, and when the time runs out, the one with more points wins. Tank was made by Steve Bristow, who worked on other games like Computer Space, that game before. This game was a commercial success and one of the best selling in the USA in the year 1974 to 1975. As for me, I think it's an okay game for its time and certainly one of the first, if not the first, tank game. So while it's obviously not the best or something, I think it's a decent experience. Taking into account the limitations of its time, I think it's decent. Obviously, in modern times, it would be a catastrophically bad game, I guess, or at least people would shit on it, like, "Whoa, this is like an indie developer's first 5 minutes of coding or something." But standards were different. I don't want to judge too harshly. Still, while I don't necessarily hate this game or anything particular about it. Number 7, Speed Race. Speed Race was a 1974 arcade racing game made by Taito, and released in the USA under the name Racer or Wheels, distributed by Midway Manufacturing. I've already talked about Wheels 2, if you remember before, when I talked about games that I did not play or for any particular reason. In the game, the player uses a steering wheel to maneuver the car on a vertically scrolling road that is scrolling very, very fast. Players score points by driving past other cars without colliding with them, and if faster you get more points, since after 90 seconds the game ends. The game was developed from concepts from other older games like Drive from 1958 and Super Road 7 from 1970. The game was a worldwide commercial success and the best-selling arcade game in the USA in 1975. The vertical scrolling used by this game was also influential in later games. The Speed Race franchise that lasted all the way until 1985 was spawned from it. It's a franchise that I've already mentioned in this video and I think will come back a few times later on in this series. I think that at the end of the day, this game is fine, and it has an okay gameplay idea, and it's not bad, and the sounds the arcade machine makes aren't horrible. But it is kind of very annoying to play since the cars that come are so fucking fast. Oh, it's infuriating, I really don't like it, but at the same time, the simple thrills you get when everything goes well, I think that highs make it better than tank for me, but there are really a lot of mechanical functioning problems that keep it from being higher up on this list, and the usual, it feels buggy, clunky, janky, slow, stuff like that. It's a mess, but I think it has an okay idea and it's kind of fun sometimes. Number 6, Breakout. Breakout was an action video game developed by Atari in 1976. In Japan, it was released by Namco. The game was made by Nolan Bushnell and Steve Bristow, with the logic chips in-game made with the assistance from Steve Jobs. In the game, 8 rows of brick line the top of the screen, and the player bounces a ball from the platform to a roof to break them. The game Clean Sweep from 1974 predated it as a concept, but the game was influenced by Atari's own Pong in 1972 as well. It was a worldwide commercial success and in the top 5 grossing video games of 1976 in the US and Japan, and in the top 3 in both countries in 1977. Atari fought a series of court cases to copyright Breakout. In Japan, this sparked an entire genre of Breakout clones, even, despite the lawsuits. In Japan, this became known as the block breaker genre. Taito's 1986 game Arkanoid was actually inspired by this game in part, which itself inspired some later imitations. This game's success also influenced the game design Taito used for Space Invaders. Now, as for me, I think it's a solid game. I mean, it somehow feels kind of empty and kind of boring to play. I don't know. Again, the ball is extremely fast. I've played some later versions where this is not as much of a problem, and the controls for moving the platform and the ball bouncing on it, they feel much more responsive, and the ball moving on the screen feels more predictable, I guess. This feels very unforgiving in a way that it feels like it wasn't designed to be so unforgiving kind of way, you know? I don't know about the original hardware, but something felt off about the controls when I played the 2600 version. And I will point this out, I played the 2600 version of Breakout, not the arcade version. I think that later versions of Breakout are better, but again, for a 1976 game, it's solid, and I think it's easy to say one of the best of its time. I think it was really hard to get working properly, but it's an okay experience. I just feel like it's missing something from me. I don't know, somehow it just feels worse than it should be. Number 5, Fairchild Video Cart 1. The Fairchild Channel F was the first homemade video console made by Fairchild Camera and Instrument in 1976. It was the first programmable ROM cartridge-based video game console and the first to use a microprocessor. When it launched, it was called the Fairchild Video Entertainment System, or the Fairchild VES. But when Atari released their Atari VCS, which later became known as the 2600, the next year Fairchild renamed the machine. All in all, 27 video cards were made for this system, with the first 21 being released by Fairchild themselves. They cost around $20 at the time, so the equivalent of that in purchasing power in today's dollars is about $114. Yeah, $114. So yeah, pretty fucking expensive for the slop that's on this system. The console contained 2 inbuilt games, tennis and hockey, which are basically advanced Pong clones. In hockey, the reflecting bar can change the diagonals by twisting the controller, and you can move it all over the field. While in tennis, it's basically Pong. The one in this ranking, though, I'll be talking about is Video Cart 1, which contained the games Tic-Tac-Toe, Shooting Gallery, Doodle, and Quadradoodle. I'll say this, Shooting Gallery is definitely the mainstay. It's basically an okay time waster I kind of liked more than anything before it. And maybe Breakout is better, and I'm actually kind of now feeling like it is. But the rest of the games on this cartridge really aren't. You know, Tic-Tac-Toe is literally just that. It's mid. It's Tic-Tac-Toe. There's nothing special about it. And Doodle and Quadradoodle just both kind of suck as well. I don't even know what they are. I think they're supposed to be pixel coloring slop, like drawing shit, but it doesn't even work in that way, so I don't know what they're supposed to be. Still, I do be thinking that the Shooting Gallery in this game alone, as well as I think this is one of the first collection games that exist, a game that's a collection of many games. I guess this is one of the first kind of games that's like that, so it does some pretty important firsts. So I think this spot is not undeserved, but I do think I might actually prefer Breakout now that I think about it as an individual game, but I'm not gonna go change my rankings now. Number 4, Gunfight. Named Western Gun in Japan and Europe, it's a 1975 multi-directional shooter arcade game by Tomohiro Nishikado, released by Taito in Japan and Midway in North America. The game is about 2 Old West cowboys with revolvers squaring off in a duel. This is believed to be one of the first games to depict human-to-human combat, and also one of the first video games to use a microprocessor instead of TTL. which just basically means it has better and complex tech compared to earlier games. In Japan, it was a commercial success, and in the USA, it was the third highest grossing game of 1975, the second highest grossing in 1976, and the fifth highest grossing in 1977. It was later ported to Bally Astrocade and and even later on to the Atari 8-bit PCs. The game happens on a single screen where two players control the two characters, and when shot, the characters fall and "Oh, you got me!" appears above the body. I think it's very charming. The game had 8-way joystick controls and another joystick for changing shooting directions. The area has obstacles like cactus and stagecoaches to block shots. Guns have limited ammo, and the run ends if both players run out of ammo. You can actually bounce bullets off the top and bottom of the screen, allowing for indirect hits. There are also some differences between the Midway and Taito version, since in the Taito version you can move anywhere on screen, while in the Midway version that was released in North America, it restricts players to their respective portions of the screen and increases character size. I think this is actually a wonderful game for its time, and if I had been young when this came out, this might have been my favorite game. Now I think it's clunky and kind of shit. Okay. But the concept that this brings to the table, it's one of the first PvP shooter kind of human-to-human games, and it has some nice flair with some stuff and all that. I really enjoyed my time with it, even if it was clunky, slow, and kind of shit by modern standards. Unlike some later games, the slowness is actually not that horrible, or maybe I'm just coping. Because, this is an extremely simple game, and archaic already, so I don't know, maybe the impact is not that bad. I really don't know what I'm talking about. I just like the simple but easily understandable shooting mechanics, and I thought it was a fun dynamic how the bullet bounced from the top of the screen and bottom of the screen. I really don't think it's amazing or really even super good by any means at all, but I honestly think it's an okay experience, and well, it's better than anything that came before this, at least. Number 3, Pong. You know what Pong is, probably. It's a 1972 sports game that was developed and published by Atari for the arcades. Originally, this game was a training exercise for Alan Alcorn, but the Atari founders were so surprised by the quality of this exercise, I guess, that they decided to manufacture it as a game. The game was based on an electronic ping pong game that was included on the Magnavox Odyssey, the first home video game console, and in response, Magnavox later sued Atari for patent infringement. And this became one of the first and biggest OG law battles of the gaming community, and shaped what the company Magnavox future would be like. It was the first commercially successful video game and established the industry alongside the Magnavox Odyssey. I think that is fair to say. Several companies jumped on the bandwagon and began to mimic Pong gameplay. It was so good that for a good long while, and many years after this year, everything was basically a Pong clone. Like, if you've paid attention, you might have noticed that on my list, there's a lack of games between 1972 and 1975. And that's basically because everything, if they even came out, was a fucking Pong clone. However, due to the competition and different companies that actually started making different games that were good and sold well, Atari had to move beyond Pong and produce more innovative games in order to stay in business. Pong is now considered one of the most culturally significant and important video games of all time, which is fair. The gameplay, I don't really have a lot of things to say. The gameplay is just table tennis with two battles bouncing a ball, and the goal is for each player to reach 11 points before the opponent, and you get a point if the opponent fails to bounce the ball back. It's a rather simple and easy game, and it's very easy to cheat the system, at least in the version I played, but I still think it's a wonderful enough game for 1972. It's also timeless, and It surprisingly isn't really that clunky compared to many other modern Pong versions. Like, sure, I've played modern versions that flow better and have better hitboxes, blah blah blah, better AI, whatever, bro. I still think that Pong deserves its rightful praise, and it's a pretty good game considering it has more positives than negatives today. And it was really influential, and considering the fact that I still think the original game is okay, I think that's pretty high praise for a game from this time. Number 2, Oregon Trail, more specifically the 1975 version. Oregon Trail was a text-based strategy video game that was made in 1971, produced by the MECC, the Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium organization, beginning in 1975, though it was already made before that. It was developed as a game to teach school children the realities of 19th century life on the Oregon Trail. In the game, players assume the role of wagon leader, guiding settlers on the trail. One must keep track of supplies, salvage bullets, hunt for food, purchase supplies, and make choices constantly on how to keep going while random events keep happening. Shit like storms and wagon breakdowns. The original game has no graphics, since the game computers of that time used teleprinters instead of monitors. The first game was developed in 2 weeks in Minneapolis. Despite its popularity, it was deleted from the school mainframe. As you may have noticed, this is a common thread in these games during this time. Rawitch, the developer, recreated it in 1974 for the MECC, which then distributed the software for free in Minnesota and for sale elsewhere. After the rise of microcomputers later on in the 70s, several versions were released for various computers, until eventually it was redesigned as a graphical commercial game for Apple II under the same name in 1985. This game is the first entry in the Oregon Trail series, and one of the most best-selling games of all time by now, and very, very famous. Many games with the same title have been released, and over 65 million units have been sold. It is in the Video Game World Hall of Fame. Later on, even games like Yukon Trail, Amazon Trail, and other spin-offs have been inspired by it. It has been described as one of the most famous ancestors of the serious game subgenre, and that just basically means that the game was designed for a primary purpose other than pure entertainment. Some argue that it's the best game of all time, or at least one of the best games of all time, which, calm down. But yeah, I can understand that it's a very important game. I played the 1975 text-based version, and I can say that it's solid. I think it's significantly better than anything before it, even Pong. But I actually had fun with this, but it isn't like super high in my estimations. It's very simplistic and unfair, I think. I think it's kind of just random chance whether you win or not. I mean, you can control your risk, and I think that may be a statement on the realities of life at that time, but it's still, that can be kind of unfun. But I thought the game was fun to dabble in, and if you have the patience for it, I think it's worth trying. I think the gameplay loop was okay, and while there isn't really that much substance into the experience, I think it's a fun educational tool that I would have liked to use if I would have learned about this subject in school, but I didn't, so yeah. I kind of like this game. I don't like this game enough to put it in the B tier or anything above like that, but I think it's significant. I think it's better than a lot of the other games so far. Number 1, Colossal Cave Adventure. Colossal Cave Adventure is a text-based adventure game released in 1976 by Will Crowther for the PDP-10 mainframe computer. It was later on expanded in 1977 by Don Woods, which added a bunch of fantasy stuff, and this is the version that I played. Which is technically cheating because I said this video only has pre-1977 games, but whatever. In the game, the player explores a cave system rumored to be full of gold and treasure. The map consists of numerous locations, and the player interacts with the objects in the map by typing 1 or 2 word commands into the console, which are interpreted by the game's natural language input system. The game is beaten when the maximum number of points, 350 in the 1977 version, is completed. The player acts as a narrator, describing what is happening, where the player is, what is around him, what he is doing. It is the first well-known example of interactive fiction and the first well-known adventure game, for which it received the honor of being the namesake for the genre. Yes, the adventure genre is named after this game. The original game was based on the developers' experiences in caving in Kentucky. Woods just expanded the size and scope of the game, putting in fantasy shit like dragons and magic spells and stuff like that. And both versions were spread over ARPANET, which was basically the precursor of the internet. And the game was played on teleprinter mainframe computers. And I'll just put this here in case someone doesn't know. Teleprinters are basically electromechanical devices that telegraph messages as they are keyed and print received messages. Colossal Cave Adventure was massively famous in the late 70s computer community, with numerous ports and modified versions made from the original source code. I don't typically talk about games too much that come later on, but Zork, of which the first versions were made in 1977, Mystery House from 1980, Rogue from 1980, and Adventure from 1980, and numerous other games were directly influenced by this game. And all those games I mentioned went to be the foundations of the interactive fiction, adventure, roguelike, and action-adventure genres. This also influenced the creation of the computer RPG and MUD genre. Many hail it as one of the most influential games of all time, and in 2019 it was inducted into the World Video Game Hall of Fame by the Strong and the ICHEG. Now, on to my opinion. I have a lot to say. Oh boy, what can I say about this game? You know, I'm not a super huge fan of the genre this game is in. Yet, the text-based interactive fiction genre, while not super gripping to me, has its own very strong charm. When I'm in the mood, I really like drawing the map, and pondering where to go, and drawing my own depiction of what my location looks like, and wondering what to do next, especially when you just smash your head together with friends and try to figure out what to do, you know? I didn't get super far into the game, maybe like 30 points at most, but I think I did explore a lot of the map. I also started using a hint website, and I think I was actually making pretty good progress at the start, but then something came up and I just never played the game again, which is unfortunate. In the like 40 minutes to an hour or 30 minutes that I spent dying and struggling with the game, I think the biggest, from what I can say from that experience, I think one of the biggest things holding the game back, like many of its successors, as I would come to find out, is the obscurity of objectives and what you're supposed to do. And the sheer difficulty of the game, the clunkiness of the text parser, and the lack of features and the quality of life stuff that modern games have. You know, I think all of that is kind of holding the experience back. Still, when I think of what it inspired and how well it plays compared to more modern contemporaries, as well as how relatively unpunishing, at least compared to some of the other interactive fiction games that would come later, it is, as well as how I think it plays rather well, as well as how easily accessible it is to play on the internet. Like, this is not a hard game to find at all and try out for yourself. No other game of its time before 1977 really inspired me as much as this game. Maybe Oregon Trail. Yet the sense of adventure which this game truly has, and the fun brainstorming and the sense of exploration that comes with games like Zork even later on, really elevates this game. I think the sense of exploration and the brainstorming you have to do, I think it's kind of fun. Upon some more introspection, I think I prefer Oregon Trail more, kind of. But I think that for now, I think I also, man, it's hard. I might even prefer this game even if I couldn't beat it, because despite its flaws, I think it's a huge achievement for its time, a very unique experience, and its good points make it an experience worth experiencing if one has time and patience and even a little bit of interest to play through it, ideally with someone else. I think it could maybe even be a B tier game, if you would do it with friends. Like I said, the frustration and lack of stuff really holds it back for me as a gaming experience. But I know the game was not designed with me in mind. It was made in a time where you spent ages upon ages playing only one expensive game. So of course you made it obscure and hard. That was just the culture, and that would be the gaming culture for a very long time. But it also impacts my current experience negatively. But yeah, what can you do about that? Still, I think this and Oregon Trail really stands above their competitors during this time period, very clearly. Okay, that's it for this video. I I spent so much time redoing these voices, and I think even so, this final version of the video will not be really that good because I just lost interest in trying to make this super good. I don't know. Anyway, I think going forward, the scope of this video will dramatically fall to only 1 year per video. But at the same time, the amount of games that I'll be talking about can still be, well, the number can be quite big. I want to imagine I'll scale down the scale of these videos, but I have no idea if future videos will be this longer or shorter, or what kind of format they will have. And that's kind of fun in its own way. It's kind of a learning journey for me in more ways than one. I just kind of wanted to yap and document my experience going through these old games, and then maybe someday reflect about it by watching these videos, or more likely cringe at them for how shit they are, as has happened before. But I will say this now: I will not be completing every game, even those that are meant to be completed. Games with a storyline beginning and ending. When I encounter story-based games and stuff like that, I will try to finish them if I feel like they're good games. But if I don't click with them, I will just move on. As of the time of recording this, I have had both kinds of experiences. Therefore, like I said at the start, my opinions should be taken with a grain of salt and from the viewpoint of someone who didn't even finish the game. Like, if I play something and I drop it at the beginning, I will mention that, and when I give it a shit score, you can cope and be like, yeah, this game gets better later on, or you just have to play more of it and you'll like it more, and you dropped it too soon, or blah blah blah. Yeah, just take that into account. Don't take these videos as objective reviews. This is just a documentation of my own feelings and experiences playing these games and the observations I make about them. That's the direction this series is going for the foreseeable future. Next time, video games begin to take a direction more familiar to the average gamer, as more and more games for the PC are made that are just not basic slop, or shit I've talked about before, like shit for the arcades. And the Atari 2600, with all its influence, good shit, and a whole lot of slop and infamy, enters the stage. In the next episode, we will cover what the year 1977 has to offer for gaming. Thanks for watching. Peace.